For the last 20 years, Russia has basically measured its global clout by one single metric: how many other countries depended on it. We're talking about a massive, highly intricate network here. A naval base in Syria, mercenary armies running security operations all across Africa, and client states from the Caucasus to Central Asia relying heavily on Moscow for arms, energy, and diplomatic cover. But that decades-old empire, it is suddenly, and honestly quite dramatically, unraveling. I mean, it's literally falling apart right before our eyes.
Geopolitical analysts have actually coined a term for what we're seeing right now. They're calling it the Great Liquidation. See, this isn't some carefully planned strategic retreat. Not at all. It is the systematic pawning off of a global empire that took decades to build. And the reason? To sustain one single war in Ukraine. The Kremlin is basically having a geopolitical fire sale, selling off the furniture everywhere else in the world just to keep the lights on in one conflict.
But what's truly staggering here is the sheer speed of this collapse. We're not talking about a slow, gradual decline over 10 or 20 years. We are looking at a window of just 90 days. Yeah, 90 days. In just the last 3 months alone, 4 foundational pillars of Russian global influence have violently fractured. We've seen this in Syria, down in Mali, over in Central Asia, and even right next door in Belarus. So, to really understand how an empire liquidates this incredibly fast, we need to dive into each of these fractures.
Act 1. The foothold in limbo. Our first major domino takes us to the Middle East, specifically to Syria. December 8, 2024. That was the day Bashar al-Assad's regime completely collapsed. And the immediate ripple effect? Absolute panic for Russian forces stationed there. That very same night, Russian warships literally had to flee the port of Tartus. We're talking about an overnight emergency evacuation right into the dark Mediterranean, while the nearby Quemain airbase was scrambling to coordinate airlifts.
Now, Russia hasn't been completely kicked out of Syria just yet, but their presence? It's entirely unsecured. They had already pulled forces from a northeastern base back in January, and by April, the new government in Damascus started pivoting that Khamimim air base into a humanitarian hub, basically stripping away its military primacy. Today, Russia's one and only warm-water Mediterranean base might survive merely as a glorified logistics depot. The real power projection they once had there, it's simply gone.
Act 2. The humiliation. Live. Let's move south into Africa, to a theater where Russia's military setbacks haven't just been abrupt, they've been highly visible. Back in November 2023, Russian mercenaries and Malian troops triumphantly seized the town of Kidal. But skip ahead to April 25th, and a coordinated rebel offensive completely routed Russia's Africa Corps right out of that exact same town. Soldiers retreated, and to quote a report on the ground, under the jeers of the very rebels they were sent to crush. They were forced to literally abandon their weapons, leaving downed helicopters sitting in the dirt behind them.
And this wasn't just a one-off defeat, right? It was a compounding cascade of absolute disasters. Right around the same time, Mali's defense minister, who was actually the primary architect of this whole Moscow relationship, died in a suicide attack. Just days later, authentic footage surfaced showing Tuareg fighters shooting down a second Africa Corps helicopter. The situation got so incredibly untenable that Russian forces have now abandoned northern Mali entirely. They've retreated all the way back just to protect the capital, Bamako.
Act 3. The patron can't fuel its clients. Okay, so defeats on the ground are one thing, but they're now bleeding into deep economic failures that are actively shaking Russia's grip on Central Asia. 25%. I want you to let that number sink in. That is the staggering amount of Russia's domestic refining capacity that has been knocked out by Ukrainian strikes. This isn't just an internal headache for Moscow, it's a massive geopolitical disaster. You have an empire built almost entirely on exporting energy, and suddenly it's struggling to fuel itself. And this domestic shortfall? It's aggressively spilling over into Russia's own backyard.
Take Kyrgyzstan, for example. Here's a client state that relies on Russia for up to 95% of its fuel. Right now, they're forced to literally beg 5 other countries for emergency gasoline. Then, look at Uzbekistan. Watching all this unreliability unfold, their president made a historic state visit to Georgia, the first one in over 2 decades, by the way. Why? Specifically to sign a strategic partnership for trade routes that bypass Russia entirely. It's pretty simple. When the patron state can't even fill up its clients' gas stations, well, the clients go out and find new patrons.
Act 4. The paradox. This brings us over to the Caucasus, and a situation in Armenia that just perfectly encapsulates the bizarre, contradictory phase this empire is currently in. Consider these two completely conflicting realities. On one hand, you have a brand new transit corridor breaking ground through Armenia this year, which is funded and majority controlled by the United States for the next 99 years.
Yet on the flip side, on July 6th, Armenia's prime minister traveled to Russia to officially reaffirm his country's commitment to the Russian-led economic union. Moscow keeps insisting that Armenia can't have it both ways, but Armenia is just doing it anyway. They are physically integrating with U.S. infrastructure, all while diplomatically hedging their bets with Moscow. It's fascinating.
Act 5. Belarus blinks. We are now approaching the real climax of this strategic unraveling, and to see it, we just have to look right at Russia's doorstep, at its most subservient neighbor. 30 years. For 3 straight decades, Belarus has had absolutely zero independent foreign policy. I mean, none. They have been entirely aligned with and completely subservient to whatever the Kremlin wants. They are the ultimate loyal ally, which is exactly what makes the events of this past June so completely unprecedented.
So, Ukraine's president delivered a hardline ultimatum: shut down the Russian-installed drone relay stations currently operating on Belarusian soil within 1 week, or Ukraine would strike Belarusian oil refineries. And what happened? Within days, Belarus quietly flipped the switch and turned the Russian equipment off. Just think about the magnitude of that for a second. To protect its own economy, Belarus openly defied Moscow and dismantled Russian military infrastructure. Think about it. If Moscow's absolute closest ally will no longer take a risk to defend Russian assets, literally nobody will.
Contraction, not a collapse. Now, while this is a profound contraction of power, it is absolutely vital to note that this is not the end. Even as Russia contracts geographically, the wider geopolitical map keeps shifting against them. Just last month, the European Union formally opened membership talks with both Ukraine and Moldova. Now, Russia actually tried to stop this. They launched a massive hybrid interference campaign, even harvesting the personal data of 145,000 Moldovans, but it failed. These neighboring countries are continuing to integrate with Europe, effectively pushing the boundaries of Russia's influence further and further back.
And this brings us to one final really crucial takeaway. What we're witnessing is a finite retreat. This massive empire that once stretched all the way from Damascus down to Bamako over to Minsk, it is being liquidated to pay for one single war right now. But what happens if the war in Ukraine stops consuming all of Moscow's resources? It's a question we have to ask. What happens when a leaner, angrier Russia comes back to reclaim everything it pawned off? The empire might be bleeding out today, but make no mistake, it is not gone.